Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Stephen Cangiano. This is RDT TV with its online companions, relationship-development.com and humanity-upgrade.com. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome one of our thought leaders and authors, Dominique Mas. Her background is phenomenal, super interesting. She's been all over the world. Let me give you a brief introduction, then we want to hear from her. Hold on one sec. So it's Dominique Mas is the founder of Lead with a Twist. After 15 years in educational leadership, she reflected on the transition she had moved through in her life and soon realized these experiences were building towards starting her own private practice for coaching. She decided to jump in and started coaching individuals as well as planning and facilitating group sessions and workshops to help others develop internal self-awareness. She is dedicated to helping others discover the possibilities hidden behind their blind spots and supports her clients to define their path and embark on their new journey with confidence. Dominique has lived in Europe, Asia, and the United States. While she doesn't coach, she is a Yoga Alliance certified instructor. She holds a master's in leadership and change and trained as a brain-based coach with the Neuro Leadership Institute. Dominique, did I leave anything out? Is there anything you can add to that?
I think that's pretty much it. Maybe that I'm a very happy person living in New York and Brooklyn with my dog and my lovely boyfriend.
Oh, beautiful. Well, welcome to the United States. We're glad we have you. So give us a little bit, I was reading about your background just quickly because you've been to so many places. Just give us a brief overview of life experience. You were born in France, you moved all over the world. Please tell us.
Yeah, I was born in France, lived there until I was 18. And the original plan was to go and study English in London. And I did that, but I ended up staying. And I stayed in London for 8 years, became a teacher, and then decided it was time to move. So I went to Barcelona, I learned Spanish, became a teacher there in an international school. And that's really when the world sort of opened up. I learned that there were opportunities to work in British schools abroad. So after an amazing trip to Africa, visiting my sister, I had this sort of epiphany moment, and it was just like, there's this whole world out there, I have to go. And I remember clearly thinking, I'm going to move to Southeast Asia because I've never been there and I really want to experience it. So I moved to the Philippines, was there for 4 years, and then took a year off, just traveling, went to Central America, then stayed in Bali for most of the time. And I needed money. So I found a great job in Hong Kong with my ex-boss from Manila. And after 3 years in Hong Kong, I came to New York on vacation and I just fell in love with it. And I was one of these people who just said, I have to live in New York, I have to go. And I remember going to see the head of school in Hong Kong and saying, this was October. So I still had such a long time for the end of year to come. And I said, I'm going to move to New York. And she looked at me and she said, but do you have a job? And I said, not yet, but I'll get one. And I did. And I got a fantastic job, moved to New York the following year in 2013 and have been here ever since.
So the word that comes into my mind listening to that is courage, or a willingness to, what is the mindset that allows you to go from France to London to Spain to Africa to Southeast Asia, Manila, Hong Kong?
I think
and then New York.
I think, there are two things that make it up. The first thing is that I was extremely lucky to have very supportive parents. And so there was never a sense of failure. There was always a sense of learning and very much a growth mindset. Whatever happens, you'll get over it and you'll make it work. And so that was incredible. And with that came the number two element, which I call my superpower, and it's simply that I trust myself. I think it's courage, but it's maybe it's not really courage. It's this idea that I know deep down that I will work out whatever needs to be worked out. And with that comes the flexibility of, well, if I didn't get a job in New York, I would have got a job somewhere else, and that would have been fine. So I think the trusting myself allows me to perhaps have this sort of detachment from outcomes, not being so focused on the one goal, and just knowing that whatever happens, it will work out in the end.
Wow, that's so if I can unpack that.
That's probably more than two.
That's good. So if I can unpack that, you had a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have this feeling like everything's going to work out. And if I could add one thing in there that seemed to seep in as well, is that you're okay with uncertainty.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think some of us have a very low threshold, and some of us have a very high threshold for it. Yeah. And I think for me, you're right. I'm okay, again, I think because I trust myself, and I feel that whatever is thrown at me, I will make or build a community around me. If I need it, I will find the tools that I need to make it work.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And you're right. A lot of people, well, I'm going to use this as a segue to get into some of your leadership training. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have a lot of difficulty. People want things like they want things to be stable. In science, we call it homeostasis, where everything, life just isn't always that way. We need to be able to live with a certain amount of uncertainty, while at the same time, our brain craves completeness. It wants to know the whole story, and we can't always know, especially in these dramatically changing times. Mm. Let's go into briefly your, I think you called it Neuro Leadership Training or Neuro Leadership Institute. Now, without getting into a lot of the technical stuff, give us an overview of that, because I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it's basically, it's really interesting. The idea of coaching through, or the training for the Neuro Leadership Institute, is really about coaching with the brain in mind. So you mentioned our brain wants certainty, right? We crave it. And there are certain areas, so David Rock, who was the founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute, calls it the SCARF model. And he talks about status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And he calls that the 5 domains, if you like, that are the major threats to the way we behave. And if we think of the brain as having one of the major organizing principles of it being threat or rewards, then we always want to sort of navigate towards rewards. And yet the brain often takes us more to the threat, because we're constantly scanning for danger, right? We're always trying to make sure that we're going to survive. And so the principles of the neuro leadership are really about giving or finding certainty, perhaps in those uncertain moments, or helping others understand where they perceive threat, and trying to help them reframe that so that it perhaps becomes a reward, or it becomes something that actually will propel them towards something that that will bring, I want to say happiness, but maybe happiness, or simply just the next level, or just get them further than where they are today, and create insight around that. So I just find it fascinating, when we work with humans, we know that no two brains are alike. Everybody is so different, and having that understanding helps certainly me as a coach to get out of myself and be an objective listener, which I think is such an important part of being a coach, but also such an important part of just being a human being. And so I don't know if I answered your question fully, but
No, you did, and
kind
there's
of
a
went
lot.
in different directions.
There's a lot in there, yeah, I have a book called The Ultimate Secret, and what it does is it goes into the 7 intellectual operating laws of how your brain craves completeness, because you're all these different things. And it's really important to understand. The other thing you discuss, which is critical for people to understand, is that our brains are designed for survival, not happiness.
Exactly.
All right. And when you say, like, it's perfect, you said scan for threats. Societies have evolved to where the major threats in the history of humanity are virtually gone: war, plague, famine, so plague and though war, plague, and famine, and those things aren't a significant threat anymore. So we have a lot of social threats that are perceived. Yeah, so that's really fascinating. So, you said it already, but I want to bring it out. You were kind of hesitant to say the word happiness.
I was hesitant because I think that happiness is a concept that can be interpreted in so many different ways, right? And I think that's why I was hesitant. I didn't want to make it a general concept because happiness is such a personal perception. And so where someone might be happy, there's a very great saying in French, which is "Le bonheur des uns fait le malheur des autres." And it means that what makes one happy might make another unhappy. And
Right.
I really like that idea. So, but I think we do want to, we are all searching for that happiness at the end of the day. We all want that happiness. And I definitely see my role as helping people to consider those threats. And you mentioned social threats, which it's incredible to me. There was a huge insight for me when I understood that the way our brains perceive social threats is the same as the way it perceives physical threats. And so our physical pain, if someone has a broken arm or an injury, we don't ask them to just get over it, right? But if our brain perceives social threats in the same way, then we should be able to help people reframe so that they don't feel so threatened anymore. And I think that's the fascinating thing in my job in terms of finding that happiness, is how do we help people and support them out of that feeling that they get when there is a perceived social threat towards that happier state or that happiness.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's very well said. Very well said. In other words, and I was just reading something yesterday with saying that social pain activates the same centers in the brain as physical pain, which is amazing, right?
Mind-blowing. I know.
And it really illustrates your point where, don't you get over it, but that's not good advice. So tell me what leadership with a twist is.
So, this all started when I left my job at the school here, and I really wanted to start to put together all of the things I love. And leadership was one of them, and coaching was another, and yoga was another. And so the idea of Lead with a Twist really came from putting together the physical body and learning through the body, as well as learning through the brain or through the mind. And as a leader, I really believe that we need to be very, very connected to ourselves if we are to be a great leader. And so in yoga, there are a lot of poses that are twists. So it'll be something like, doing something like this, for example. That's a twist. And the idea of the twist is that it helps to create some space. So to me, in order to be a great leader, you constantly have to create space within yourself, within your head, within your body. If you're going to help and serve other people, you need to be able to let them in. And so this idea of Lead with a Twist really came from that. And it's interesting because we had a little chat before we started the interview, but I really found that as I was leading workshops, and I actually found that the yoga part, or leading the yoga sessions within the workshops I was leading, just didn't work for me anymore. And so I've really wanted to keep it, because I think that the idea is absolutely there. And what I've done instead is, instead of doing full yoga poses, I include yoga Nidra, which is a deep relaxation technique where I allow participants in the workshop to just lay down, and I guide them through a full body relaxation. So it's a full body scan, and then usually visualization on the topic that we've discussed. And I feel that, again, in order to be a great leader, to gain that space, to make that space within yourself, is the twist, right? Is the twist on where we have a traditional view of leadership of, you know, you're going to do this because I told you to do so. And yeah, that's really where it came from, and how it's evolved along the journey.
Yeah. So obviously, as I was reading through some of your material, you were looking for that confirmation bias, where you were talking to your friends and everybody said it was a good idea, but then you were willing to change. You were willing to change your strategy, which when you moved from Hong Kong to the United States, you did all this, and then, well, you know what, I'm going to change my strategy, which a lot of people have trouble doing. What was the mindset that allowed you to actually switch to something better that you were really committed to?
You know, it really took talking to people. It was one of the hardest thing I've done, I have to say. You know, there is this concept called sunk cost fallacy, that once you've invested in something so much, you kind of feel like you have to keep going with it. And so I did have that feeling for quite a while, and it took me talking to people, talking to a coach, and really, really working on myself to accept that it's okay to let it go. It clearly wasn't working, and yet I was sort of clinging on to it. And I was talking earlier about not being attached to outcomes, and this is really where I was. And it took the help of a coach really to kind of reframe this mindset and think, actually, no, I do not need this. I really don't need it. And once that switch happened in my mind, it was like, okay, I'm okay to let it go. I think I have a predisposition to being okay with letting things go. I mean, as you said, I've traveled and I've moved around, so it's not so hard for me. But I could see that it was, there was something there. There was something there that I was still holding on to it, and it took me a while to accept it.
So it sounded like it did create some internal conflict, but you were able to let it go. And I love your terminology. It's sunk cost fantasy. And, yeah. And, you know, it's really important to kind of understand how your brain works.
Yes.
And with all the new research we're doing, I want to ask you a question, because you say you coach the rebel in others.
Yes.
And you're so well spoken and so calm. I'm wondering, is there a rebel in there? And then how do you coach the rebel in others?
Huge rebel. The rebel that everyone expects it to be. I think that I was born in a rebel family. I was born in a family that did not follow many societal norms. My mom and dad were not married. We grew up doing whatever we wanted as kids. And so we had a lot of freedom. And my parents had, especially my dad, a lot of issues with authority. And he never went to jail, but not that I know of. But we had this sense that, I guess, this sense of freedom inside of us. And I think when I say I coach the rebel inside people, that's what I mean. I mean that I want to encourage people to really challenge the status quo that they created for themselves. You know, we do things, we get to a certain level where we feel comfortable and we stay there. And after a while, it just doesn't feel comfortable anymore. But many of us stay. And it's that same thing with the yoga and letting it go. Like, it's so hard to let go because of the uncertainty factor, because we think that this is what we're supposed to do because that's what everyone else does. And so the rebel for me is really helping everyone understand that what everyone else is doing might be great for them, but it might not be great for you. And so be a rebel and do what's right for you and not what's right for everyone else or what everyone else tells you is right to do. And I think it helps to really dig deep and open new doors for people, to change the way, to really see new opportunities, to trust themselves, act with confidence, self-trust, and all of those things. Take some risks.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I'm sure a lot of viewers are going to be asking, well, it sounds like you had a lot of freedom growing up.
Mm.
How did you balance that freedom with structure and, kind of functioning so successfully in society? In other words, when, again, how did you balance that? Because a lot of people are saying, if I give my kids too much freedom, they're just going to kind of fall off the ledge and, go. How did you balance the freedom with your obvious success?
I think a lot of it was, we had a lot of freedom, but within that freedom, we did have a lot of structure at home, and we had a lot of love. We never had money. Like, I grew up, I wouldn't say I was poor. We always had enough food, but we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't go on vacation, all of those things. So a lot of the values that we learn at home and very young. And my mom especially was very, very, she was very clear on boundaries. She was very, very good at setting boundaries. We had a lot of freedom. We could do, I was age 4 and I was going to the beach by myself. It was right in front of the house, but I was going by myself. But there were very clear boundaries. It's like, okay, well, you have to be home at 4:30 p.m. And if I wasn't home at 4:30 p.m., there'd be huge consequences and repercussions. So I think there is a lot of that. I also think that for me, a lot of the structure came from wanting to do the right thing. So a lot of it was self-imposed. A lot of it was that we could do what we wanted. Sometimes, perhaps we didn't get enough recognition for the good things that we did. And so I wanted to please. I wanted to do a lot of things to get that recognition. Mm-hmm. And I think I would get that from teachers, for example. So I would impose that structure on myself at school. Later on, I would get that from employers. And so I would impose that structure on myself at work. So I think I guess that's how it came into my life. I don't know.
Wow. That's a great, beautiful story. So I know one of your expertise is getting people unstuck. Mm. So what do you do when people feel stuck? They're not willing to they look at your life and says, oh, I could never do that. That's amazing. How do you get people to really get unstuck, to really experience, as you talked about previously, their life?
Yeah. I think one of the most important things to me is having that little switch in our head, right? So it's really, I want to say, working with someone, whoever it is, or talking to people, but really trying to get to that insight where you start seeing the possibilities. And I feel that in order to get there, one of the massive, hugest, most important thing is self-expansion, is continuing to learn new skills, new content, see new horizons if you can, really allow ourselves to go places, not necessarily physically, but even in our head that we haven't been before. so that we can discover new perspectives, we can look at new ways of seeing the world. And in order to do that, we have to start getting out of our comfort zone. We have to start being willing and being okay with taking a little risk, for example. I think one of the most important things that we need to do to get to that point where we're willing to take those risks then is to really connect with ourselves as deeply as possible. And for many people, that means different things. It could be working with a coach. It could be to go to meditation classes. It could be to turn to your spiritual beliefs, whatever it is. This idea of fully connecting to ourselves in order to be able to see where we are right now, because we can't go anywhere. We can't get unstuck if we're unable to understand that we are stuck, right? If we're not able to see where we are, if we're sort of in the fishbowl and unable to get out of it, then we're never going to be able to see ourselves from outside of it or to see what else is out there. So it's really that deep connection to ourselves. I'm working at the moment with a friend called Vanessa Cameron, and she founded a company called iSpark, and we're working together on a workshop that we're hoping to present mainly for women, called Empowered. And it's really about empowerment from within. And we were thinking about what are the things that we need as leaders, what are the things that we need as leaders of ourselves in order to be able to make those new connections and really get unstuck. And we were thinking we need to trust ourselves. We need to listen to ourselves, to know what fuels us, to speak up for ourselves. We need to own our wins and our losses. And we need to know when to say no, to set boundaries, to how to focus ourselves. If we can do all of those things, and it takes time, it's not easy, then I feel that then we can get unstuck. So it starts with a hell of a lot of work on who we are and where we are today. And then slowly, we can start to expand.
So there's a few themes that are just coming through when I talk to you. First one is growth mindset. Yeah, we call it here at RDT expansion mindset, which is similar. Your mind should always be expanding, because that's the true nature reality. The other thing you're talking about is how do you free yourself from these old habits, thoughts, that kind of thing. And I'm curious, because this is an observation I've made. I'd love for you to be able to comment on it. It's difficult because when you look at happiness, there's a lot of different definitions of happiness. One is safety, satisfaction, and connection. Those three things working together. Do you feel safe? Do you feel satisfied? Do you feel connected to others? And it seems like one of the greatest benefits of the coaching process, which is leadership process, family process, is what some people refer to as a resonant relationship. A relationship where you feel like you're connected to someone that's helping you move forward. And can you because in my experience and in some good research, there's really no significant growth outside the context of a resonant relationship. Somebody who can give you feedback, who can get you out of the fishbowl, can get you unstuck. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have to agree 100%. I'll start with my own experience. And when I remember very clearly, I lived in Hong Kong at the time, and I was in a very difficult relationship. I was absolutely in that fishbowl, and it was very, very hard for me to get out of it. And it's only when I started seeing someone who's a Reiki master. So she did Reiki on me, but she was really coaching me. And now with the hindsight, I realized we were talking a lot. And it's only with her help that I was really able to see that I was stuck, that I was in there, that I was absolutely I was in my head and I could not possibly get out of it. And with her help and the questions that she asked me, I managed to really start seeing other possibilities. But you're absolutely right. And I see that in some of my clients. I see that when we start, there's this idea that I can't leave my job. Well, why not? No, you can, really. But this takes time. But this accepting that actually you can takes time, because again, you need to be able to see where you are. And I think you're absolutely right. Having that sort of sounding board, having that person who can point things out to you. I think as a coach, we certainly, I'm not always nice. I'll say to people, I'll point things out to people, and I'll say, listen to yourself, listen to what you just said. This totally contradicts what you said here. And suddenly it's like that face, that moment of insight. We're like, oh yeah. And then the wheels stop turning, and then, things stop changing. But I absolutely agree. I think having whoever it is, for some people, it might be a church leader or a religious leader or a spiritual leader. Yeah. For others, it might be a coach or perhaps a therapist. Whoever it is, I really agree that we need to have that sounding board, that way of articulating our thoughts to someone else. And really, we're articulating it to ourselves, but because we're externalizing everything, we're actually able to get out.
Yeah. I as I get more and more experience, it's really self-improvement in the context of reading a book or even just going to a seminar isolated from, doesn't really work. You need a resonant relationship, like a coach or a teacher, or like you said, a therapist or a Reiki master, or maybe a karate black belt, whatever that is, because that's going to close the loop on the safety, satisfaction, connection, and really get you to where you want to go. So one last question. We could go on for hours because you're absolutely amazing. I mean, and your depth of knowledge just comes through with every sentence. How do you help people get clear on their vision? And I want to kind of relate it to this resonant relationship, or this relationship, because one of the things you mentioned is that you don't coach for compliance. You coach people to what their success is, where they want to go. Yeah. And so how do you help people get clear on and achieve their vision?
We start, we always start with thinking about bigger goals, bigger ideas, bigger goals, thinking about their vision. And it's only once we've set that vision, we're starting to open the door. But most people will say, yeah, but I really don't think I can do this. I'm like, well, you never know. You never know. If you don't dream big, you're never going to get big. So let's try it. Let's see. So we always start by really thinking about vision. And it's only when we've got this idea, or remember we were talking about how we don't want to be fixated on an outcome. So we have a vision, we have a direction, but we also have the flexibility to change it. But once we have that vision clarified, or perhaps the vision is simply that we want clarity towards something, then we can start digging deep. And then we really start digging into, okay, what is it that you really, really want to achieve? We start thinking about a strategy in order to achieve that. And the first part of this strategy is always to really observe where you are today, where you are now. And that, I find, is often the part that takes the longest time, because you have to really consider, as you said earlier, the patterns that you're working with, the habits, your mindsets, those things where your brain goes, right? We were talking about the brain earlier. Most of what we do, most of our behaviors are habitual. They're patterns where we the brain likes to function on autopilot. It's saving resources. So it's much easier if I know exactly what I'm doing. So the brain wants to do the same things always in the same way. And so once we start digging into these patterns and really considering that there are physical, mental, emotional behaviors that we repeat, but that are actually an obstacle to getting to the next step, then we start being able to remove those, right? And to create those new habits and those new patterns that will help us move forward. And that's the magic. That's the magical time when I see that someone is there and we've removed a lot of these blockades kind of thing, then we can start to think about, okay, now let's review your vision. Let's look again. What's going on now? And it's like, oh, we can make it even bigger because I don't have these things holding me back. So we start looking at vision again, and then we start to really think, okay, well, what do you need in order to get there? What skill set do you need? What sort of attitude do you need? What connections do you need? And that's when we start researching, and that's super exciting because things really start happening then. And usually we get there. We get there because we've been working so much on mindset, and we start to create this sort of energy, right? As you create an insight, it creates so much energy within us. And if we can tap into that energy at the right time, then the magic happens and we're off to really creating that vision.
Beautiful. You know, you've had some similar observations to me. People have an unhealthy relationship with their present reality many times. Instead of saying, I am 300 pounds, they say, oh, I'm just a lazy, fat, you know, all get into that self-mortification, that self. And then what also you do is you clear up the present, the vision gets bigger, you clear up, the vision gets bigger, and then you have the learn, what do I need to learn? What do I need to practice? And as we go through this, how could that happen outside the context of a healthy, or what I call a resonant relationship between you and the coachee? This is something, and please comment, is like when people go to these 1 day, 2 day, 3 day seminars, what they do is they activate and release a lot of emotion, and it feels great. And then they make some probably decisions that aren't in their best interest in the heat of that moment. But when I've seen that, it doesn't really affect permanent change, or even let's call it transformation, because I think what you're talking about is really transforming people's lives.
I agree. And we are in the transformation age. So
Right.
Yep, absolutely. But yes, I absolutely agree. I think those big seminars, they give you a boost, right? They give you an absolute boost of energy, but then most of the time, if there's no follow-up one-on-one, that energy sort of dies down. I was observing nature the other day. I was on a retreat, and there was, I'm not sure what the animal was, but it was grazing, and it went, and then it continued grazing. And it reminded me of exactly that process of, oh, I have an insight, but I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing before.
Right.
And that's to me is exactly what happens in those big seminars. I mentioned that I've created some workshops, and what I do with those is I only have 6 people there, and they're really going through a coaching process where I'm asking them questions, and I don't deliver any content. I only ask them questions, and there's always a small discussion, and there's always a little follow-up. And of course, I don't believe that they will transform someone in the way that they need to be transformed, but they allow for deeper questioning and the beginning of that transformation. And then hopefully they'll follow up and work with me or with someone else, but hopefully they'll take that somewhere. And
Yes. Yeah, and you know, when people go to 3 or 4 of these seminars and they don't get the results they want, a lot of times they lose credibility with themselves. They activate the emotions, release the emotions, but they don't instill the things that are going to move them forward like you do in your coaching process, which is again totally in alignment with everything I understand and have read and et cetera, and in my experience. All right, we could go on all day.
Yes, we
And
could.
we're gonna bring this in now. Any parting thoughts that you have, or anything else that we maybe didn't touch on that's super important?
Not really. I can't think of anything. I want to say a big thank you for having me, obviously. But I think we covered so much. I'd love for anyone who's watching this to get in touch with me. I'm always happy to hear from people, if it's for a discussion or through LinkedIn, whatever it is. I'm always happy to connect with people. So yeah, but I can't really think of anything else. I think we've covered a lot today.
Yeah, it was a great interview. Great, I really resonate with, and a lot of what you're doing is also like what we're doing with our new magazine, which is Humanity Upgrade. It's really how do the neuroscience and the processes that'll help move people's lives forward. You are phenomenal. You
Well,
are really phenomenal. We're so glad you moved to New York City. You came to
thank
the
you.
United States. I'm sure Hong Kong and all those other countries miss you very much. We're actually going to have your contact information on the bottom here. So again, thank you so much, Dominique. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure. This is Dr. Stephen Cangiano from RDT.Media and Events signing off. Thanks again. Loved having you.
Thank you.